The little girl raised her hand on live TV and asked Elon Musk the one question no one expected. The room froze, cameras rolled, and what he said next didn't just stun the audience, it sparked a worldwide conversation. What happens when a man of science answers a child's question about God? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The cameras rolled and lights bathed the studio in a soft glow as the live television broadcast began. Kids filled the audience, some perched on their parents' laps, others clutching little notepads, eager to hear from the man who'd sent rockets to space and reimagined the future of transportation. Elon Musk was about to speak, and the air buzzed with anticipation. The host, polished and smiling, gave the usual welcome, his voice upbeat and practiced, expecting a discussion filled with science, innovation, and perhaps a few jokes about Mars. Elon walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. Dressed simply in a dark blazer and open-collar shirt, he looked composed, but his eyes held something different, something quieter. The applause faded as he took his seat, nodding to the host, then glancing around at the children in the front rows. He smiled faintly, but behind it was a pause. Not nervousness, something else. Reflection. The host began with a question about AI, but Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, he cleared his throat and leaned slightly forward. "Before we talk about technology," he said, his voice steady but subdued, "can I ask you something?" The host blinked. Elon looked out at the kids. "Have you ever wondered why we're here?" The room froze. Just as Elon's question hung in the air, a small hand rose from the front row. The cameras panned down to a little girl in a bright pink dress, her hair tied in a tidy ponytail. She looked nervous but determined, her eyes fixed on Elon. The host blinked in surprise, then smiled and nodded toward Elon, giving him permission to acknowledge her. Elon leaned slightly forward, intrigued. "Yes," he said warmly. The girl took a deep breath, then spoke in a clear, soft voice that pierced the stillness. "Mr. Musk, do you believe in God?" The room fell silent, truly silent. Even the faint hum of studio equipment seemed to vanish. The host froze, eyebrows raised. Elon didn't answer right away. His smile faded, not out of discomfort, but out of reflection. He looked at the girl, then slowly at the audience, his gaze sweeping across a sea of eyes, all waiting for his reply. "That's a great question," he said finally. "And the truth is, yes. I believe there's something greater than all of us." He paused. The silence deepened. Not empty, but full of thought. Something had shifted. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was something more. Elon took a slow breath, his tone more reflective now. "I was raised in a world where science ruled everything," he began. "Equations, data, logic. That's what I trusted. I believed that if something couldn't be measured, tested, or proven, then it probably didn't matter." The audience listened closely as his voice softened. And for a long time, that mindset worked for me. It helped me build companies, launch rockets, and solve problems that seemed impossible. He glanced toward the ceiling lights, as if trying to recall something far beyond them. But then something started to shift. The more I learned about the universe, the deeper I dug into black holes, gravity, quantum mechanics, the more I started to wonder, not just how everything works, but why. Why does the universe follow such precise rules? Why is it even here in the first place? Why am I? He paused, letting the question settle before continuing. When you launch a rocket into space and see the Earth as a fragile blue sphere hanging in the void, it changes you. You feel small, and in that smallness you start to feel something else. Like maybe there's a reason behind it all. Maybe it's not random. He turned to the little girl in pink. There had to be more than just code and engines. Elon's gaze returned to the audience. I've had success, more than I ever imagined, but it didn't fill the space I carried inside, not completely. I kept pushing, building, innovating, but something was still missing. And it wasn't until moments like this, when a child asks a question that science can't answer, that I realized maybe my heart had been asking it too. A boy near the front, maybe 12 years old, raised his hand slowly. He looked nervous but determined, his voice quiet but clear as the host called on him. "Mr. Musk, if there's a God, then why do bad things happen?" The room stilled again. Even the background hum of the studio lights seemed to pause. Elon's expression softened as he turned to the boy. "That's a really important question," he said. "And to be honest, it's one of the hardest questions anyone can ask. People have wrestled with it for thousands of years, people far wiser than me." He shifted in his chair, thoughtful. "I've thought about it too, a lot. And here's what I believe right now. Maybe it's because we've been given something powerful. Freedom. The freedom to choose." He glanced around the room, scanning the faces of parents and children. "We're not robots. We don't move through life on a fixed path. We can choose to love or to hate, to help or to hurt. And sometimes, people choose wrong." There were nods around the audience, some from adults who understood the weight of that truth, but the children, especially the boy who asked, were still leaning forward, waiting for more. "But even in those bad moments," Elon continued, "there's still hope, because sometimes the hardest times in life teach us the most. They help us grow stronger, more compassionate, more aware of what really matters." He looked directly at the boy now. "You know, I've failed more times than I can count. I've had rockets explode, ideas fall apart, dreams that didn't work out, and in some of those moments, I've wondered the same thing you just asked. Why do these things happen?" The hush fell again. "And sometimes," he said softly, "it's only looking back that I see how those hard moments shaped me. They didn't feel good, but they helped me become who I needed to be." The boy blinked, digesting the words. "And I believe," Elon added, "that even when bad things happen, there's still something bigger at work, not controlling us, but walking with us, giving us strength, reminding us we're not alone." There was a long pause as Elon's words settled over the room. Some of the adults looked visibly moved. Others simply stared, quiet and contemplative. The children watched in awe. Elon Musk, the man they came to hear talk about rockets and robots, was giving them something far deeper, something human, something they hadn't expected. And it was only the beginning. The questions didn't stop. After Elon finished his thoughtful answer about free will and hardship, another child raised her hand, this time a boy with curly hair and glasses. "Mr. Musk," he said cautiously, "you're really smart, but if science can't explain everything, then how do we know anything is real?" The audience let out a small laugh, but Elon didn't. He nodded, genuinely impressed. "That's a really profound question," he said. "And you're right. Science is incredible. It's helped us understand so much about how the universe works. But," he paused, "there are things that science may never explain." The studio went quiet again. "I've launched rockets. I've stared down at Earth from space. I've seen what happens when you push the limits of knowledge. But even after all of that, there are still things I can't measure. Like love. Like hope. Like the sense that something matters beyond just survival. Those aren't things you can put under a microscope." He leaned forward slightly, his voice gentler now. "And that's where faith comes in. Not blind faith, not pretending to know what you don't, but the kind of faith that allows you to stand in awe, the kind that says, 'I don't know everything, but I believe there's something more.'" One of the kids near the front whispered, "Wow." Elon smiled, then continued, "You know, I don't always know what I believe. Some days I think I've figured it out. Other days, I'm not so sure. But I do know one thing. I believe in purpose. I believe we're here for a reason." A young girl sitting cross-legged near the stage raised her hand and asked, "Do you think we were created?" Elon looked at her for a long moment. "I think it's possible. And I think wondering about it, that's important. Because questions like that don't make you weak. They make you brave." He sat back slightly, his expression shifting into something softer, more vulnerable. "I spent a long time pretending I had all the answers. And in my work, sure, I have a lot. I can tell you how rockets work, how to land one upright, how to design the next electric car. But that's not the same as knowing why we're here, or what it means to be good, or what comes after this life." His words hung in the air. "For a long time," he added, "I avoided those questions. Maybe because I thought they were too big, or maybe I was afraid there wouldn't be an answer. But something changed. I started listening, not just with my ears, but with my heart. And when I did, I started hearing things differently." The audience was riveted. It was no longer a tech talk. It wasn't even a debate. It was something deeper, a moment of human truth unfolding in real time. Elon turned back toward the children. "Don't be afraid of not knowing," he said gently. "Some of the most important things in life start with not knowing. They start with wonder." A few kids smiled. Some of the parents had tears in their eyes. And as Elon sat there, no longer the inventor, no longer the CEO, just a man surrounded by questions, it became clear. He wasn't trying to convince anyone. He was simply trying to tell the truth as best he could. And for the first time, he wasn't answering as a leader of innovation. He was answering as someone still learning, still reaching, still searching. Someone like the rest of us, just trying to understand what it all means. Backstage after the show, Elon Musk sat in his dressing room, the applause from the studio still echoing faintly in his ears. The bright lights were gone, replaced by a soft glow from the single lamp on the table beside him. The energy of the crowd had faded, but something else lingered. Something quieter, more personal. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped. He had come expecting to speak about rockets, innovation, the future of humanity, but instead he had ended up talking about God, life's biggest questions, and the parts of himself he rarely exposed. And it had felt right. He thought back to his childhood, back to quiet nights staring at the stars from his backyard in South Africa. Even then he remembered feeling a pull, a question that went deeper than physics or math. Who made all this? What does it mean to be alive? But no one had really answered. So he turned to science. It gave him frameworks, systems, certainty, and yet some questions had never left. As he sat in silence, Elon reached for his phone and searched for something he hadn't typed in years. Books on faith, on philosophy, on meaning. He wasn't sure where to start, so he downloaded a few. One by a scientist who had found faith, another by a philosopher who believed doubt was part of the journey, and a Bible. He figured if he was going to ask, he might as well start with the source so many had turned to before him. That night, in the quiet of his hotel room, Elon read slowly, not for answers, not for evidence, but for something else, something deeper. He wasn't looking to prove or disprove anything. He just wanted to understand. He paused on a line from the Gospel of Matthew. It wasn't dramatic. It simply said, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find." He stared at the words for a long moment, letting them sink in. Then, almost without thinking, he put the book down, walked to the window and looked up at the night sky. The stars shone faintly above the city lights, quiet, distant, familiar. And then, with a breath he didn't realize he was holding, Elon whispered something he hadn't said in decades. "If you're real, I'm listening." There was no flash of light, no voice in the room, but a warmth filled his chest, not from outside but from within. It wasn't certainty, it wasn't clarity, but it was peace. He stood there for a while, just breathing, eyes fixed on the stars. He didn't know if anyone had heard him, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the act of reaching out, of admitting that he didn't have it all figured out, was enough. In that quiet moment, Elon Musk, the man known for answers, logic, and control, allowed himself to be vulnerable. And it didn't feel like weakness, it felt like strength. He returned to the chair, picked up the book again, and kept reading. But now, it was different. Now, it wasn't just about knowledge, it was about seeking. And though the questions remained, they no longer felt like burdens. They felt like invitations. Invitations to grow, to wonder, to believe. And in that stillness, Elon understood. His journey was only just beginning. A few days after the live broadcast, Elon Musk stood before a group of high school students gathered for a special event. The auditorium wasn't massive, but it was filled with energy, students buzzing with curiosity, teachers seated quietly along the walls. Most of them had watched the show, most of them had heard what he said, but none of them knew what was coming next. Elon walked to the center of the stage, no podium in front of him, no slideshow behind, just him and a microphone. He paused for a long moment before speaking. "Science shows you how," he began, "but faith helps you ask why." A hush fell over the crowd. He let the words settle before continuing. "The other day during a live show, a little girl asked me a question I'll never forget. She looked me straight in the eye and asked, 'Mr. Musk, do you believe in God?'" He paused again, letting the moment breathe. One question did something to me. It didn't just challenge my thinking. It reawakened something I had pushed aside for years. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to answer it. He looked out at the students, their faces a mix of awe and wonder. "You see, for most of my life, I've leaned on science. I still do. I love it. It's helped me launch rockets, build electric cars, and dream of reaching Mars. But there's always been a deeper question beneath it all. Not how the universe works, but why it's here in the first place. Why we are." Several students nodded quietly, their eyes locked on him. "I used to think science and faith couldn't exist in the same space, that it was either logic or belief. But I've come to think that maybe they're both part of the same truth. Two sides of a bigger mystery we're all trying to understand." He smiled gently. "Science can measure what's seen, but faith helps you trust what you can't see. And sometimes the most important truths aren't found under a microscope or through a telescope. They're found in silence, in wonder, in the courage to keep asking." One student in the front row raised his hand, and Elon nodded to him. "So, do you believe now?" Elon took a breath. "I believe in purpose. I believe that all of you were created with gifts, and that those gifts matter, not just because they help you build or achieve, but because they help you serve, inspire, and lift others up." He walked slowly across the stage, no script, just honesty. You don't have to choose between facts and faith. You can study the stars and still believe there's a reason they shine. You can build the future while still trusting that something bigger than yourself is guiding your steps. The room was quiet, not out of politeness, but reflection. "And maybe," Elon said, "that little girl's question wasn't just for me. Maybe it's for all of us. What do you believe? And are you brave enough to find out?" He stepped back and let the silence do its work. Because sometimes wisdom doesn't arrive in answers. It arrives in the courage to keep asking. 2 days after his talk with the students, Elon Musk sat in his study, quietly reflecting. The questions, the silence, the wonder in the children's eyes. It all echoed louder than the applause he was used to. He opened his laptop, hovered over his keyboard, then began to type. "I don't have all the answers, but I believe we're not here by accident." He paused, reading the words back to himself. Simple, honest, and true. Then, with a deep breath, he hit post. Within minutes, the message began to spread. At first, it was shared by a few fans, then journalists picked it up, then the networks. The post went viral, lighting up timelines, news feeds, and headlines around the world. Some critics accused him of stepping too far into philosophy or theology. Others praised him for his courage, for opening a door that too few in his position were willing to touch. But beyond the noise, something real began to happen. People started talking, really talking, not just about God, but about purpose, about what mattered most. From college campuses to church pews, from classrooms to dinner tables, Elon's words echoed. He hadn't delivered a scientific theory or unveiled a new machine. He had simply asked a question the world had long avoided and offered a bridge between two worlds that were too often kept apart. In the weeks that followed, Elon began accepting speaking invitations again, but not to talk about rockets or robots or artificial intelligence. This time, he spoke about something deeper. He stood in auditoriums, sat in town halls, and walked among crowds not as the visionary inventor, but as a man who had seen something worth sharing. At a large global youth conference, he took the stage once more. The room was massive. Thousands of students from across the world filled every seat. The lights dimmed. The host introduced him not with a list of achievements, but with one sentence. Tonight, Elon Musk will speak, not to change your mind, but to open your heart. Elon stepped forward slowly. No slides, no specs, just presence. When I was a kid, he began, I was told science would explain everything, and for a long time I believed that. He looked out over the sea of young faces. But now I think science can't explain the most important things. Why we love, why we forgive, why we keep going even when it's hard. He paused. I don't have all the answers, but I know this. We're not here by accident. The crowd was still. You were made for more, not just to invent things, but to care, to lift others, to listen to the questions no one dares to ask. He shared the story of the little girl, the one who had asked him about God on live TV. How that one moment had cracked open a door in his heart he never knew was closed. How her question had led to weeks of searching, reading, praying. Sometimes the smallest voice asks the biggest question, Elon said softly, and that question can change everything. He stood silently for a moment, then looked into the crowd. Believe in more, he said at last, because you were made for more. The room erupted not in noise, but in quiet tears, in shared looks, in hands held. It wasn't the launch of a rocket. It was the launch of something greater. In a quiet studio, long after the headlines had faded and the lights dimmed, Elon Musk sat for a follow-up interview. No audience, no stage, just a chair, a camera, and a moment of stillness. He folded his hands, looked into the lens, and spoke with a calm, reflective tone. People often ask me what the greatest discovery of my life has been, he began. And for years I thought it was the Falcon Heavy, or maybe our advancements in AI. But now, I'm not so sure. He paused, letting the silence settle. Maybe the biggest discoveries aren't made in space. Maybe they're made in the human spirit. His voice softened as he leaned slightly forward. Every breakthrough I've ever made started with a question, and I think the most important ones, the ones that really matter, aren't about what's out there, but about why we're here. He looked straight into the camera, eyes steady. So never stop asking the big questions, never stop wondering, because sometimes the search itself is what leads us home. If this inspiring story opened your heart to something greater, subscribe now for more powerful journeys into faith, meaning, and the deeper truths that unite us all.